They thought they could quietly force my grandmother out with fines, notices, and fear. But what they didn't know, Grandma Eleanor wasn't just baking cookies and reading mystery novels. She was building a case, and I just stepped into the middle of it. It began the day I arrived at Grandma's little blue cottage to house sit while she recovered from surgery. The same cottage I'd spent every summer in as a kid, the one that smelled like cinnamon and lemon polish with creaky floorboards that hummed memories into your feet. But now, something was off. Very off. There was a neon orange notice flapping on the front door like a slap in the face. Violation, unapproved exterior paint color. Action required within 72 hours. My chest tightened. That sky blue shade had wrapped Grandma's home for as long as I could remember. I ripped the notice down, confused, then heard a voice behind me, high, sweet, and sharp as lemon. "Welcome to Pine Rest Village," said a woman at the edge of the lawn. She looked like a catalog ad, perfect blonde highlights, white blouse, and that HOA badge like it was pinned straight to her soul. "I'm Karen Thompson, Community Standards Chair." I forced a smile. "Hi, I'm Jamie, Eleanor's grandchild. I'm staying here while she's in rehab." "Ah, yes." "So sad about Eleanor," she cooed, eyes scanning the cottage like a predator measuring its next leap. The paint was grandfathered in, of course, but once it fades, even a little, it must conform to the HOA's updated palette. Mostly earth tones now. Browns, taupes, you understand. I didn't understand at all. "The paint isn't faded," I said plainly. She gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Our inspector noted fading on the west wall. The violation stands. 72 hours or fines begin, $100 per day." And with that, she turned, walking back toward her oversized, modern monstrosity next door. As she vanished behind a row of shrubs, I caught movement on the porch. Her husband, Robert, was watching quietly until he saw me looking. Then he disappeared behind the door like a man with too much to hide. Inside the cottage, the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket. The same floral quilts, the same ticking clock. But it felt like someone had stepped on sacred ground. Grandma's roses in the backyard had been hacked back, not trimmed, mangled, wrong. I called her right away. "Third notice this month," she sighed. First, it was the roses being too close to the sidewalk. Then the mailbox wasn't regulation height. "But you've lived here for decades. How can they just decide this now?" I asked. "That's what happens when developers take over the HOA," she said, her voice firm beneath the fatigue. "Richard Vaughn became president 6 months ago. He's a lawyer for Pinnacle Development Group." I froze. Pinnacle. I'd seen their trucks downtown, where they'd bulldozed 6 historic homes to build gray boxes the size of schools. "They want my lot," Grandma continued. "It's on the corner with the best view of the creek, perfect for their flagship model. But I won't sell." I swallowed hard. "You focus on healing. I'll handle this." But I didn't know what this really was until I tripped on something in the driveway. At first, I thought it was just gravel. Then I bent down. It was a spike, a sharpened metal caltrip, half buried where the car tires would pass. I dug around with gloved hands and found 3 more. Someone had deliberately planted tire killers in my grandmother's driveway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the front room listening to the wind shift through the pine trees, staring at the violation notice taped to the coffee table. Then a pair of headlights swept across the window, slow, deliberate. A black SUV idled, then drove off. Its license plate, PNCL1. My heart sank. Pinnacle. The next morning I stepped outside to find the mailbox dented in, bent like it had taken a baseball bat. Inside was another orange notice. Improper yard maintenance. I hadn't even finished breakfast. Karen was watering her lawn when I looked up. "Such a shame about that mailbox," she called sweetly. "Teenagers these days." I forced myself not to speak, but as I turned to go inside, she added one more thing under her breath. "She's not leaving. We may have to accelerate the timeline." I paused, heart thudding. I wasn't just facing a petty HOA. I was standing in a war zone. And the more I looked around, the more I realized this wasn't just about one cottage. It was about control, corruption, and the one person they hadn't counted on coming back home. I didn't sleep that night, not because I wasn't tired, but because I couldn't stop thinking. The mailbox, the roses, the spikes, the SUV. It was no longer a question of if they were targeting Grandma, it was why. And if this was about pressuring her to sell, I needed to know who was behind it. So after a cup of lukewarm coffee and a breath of morning air that didn't feel fresh anymore, I sat at her old roll-top desk and started digging. First stop, the HOA website. Buried among announcements about community cookouts and pet leash reminders was a link to the bylaws, 216 pages long. But right there in section 12.4, historic homes, like Grandma's 1932 cottage, were exempt from newly introduced appearance regulations. So no, they couldn't force her to repaint. And no, they couldn't legally fine her over her blue siding. Then came the real gem. Nowhere in the document did it mention anything about spike strips, late-night drive-bys, or mailbox vandalism, which meant everything that had happened was extra-legal. Intimidation, bullying, possibly even criminal. By noon, I was standing outside the Pinarest Village Community Center with a folder under my arm, copies of every violation notice, photos of the spikes, printouts from the HOA bylaws, and a growing sense of purpose. Inside, I found the HOA office just past a manicured hallway lined with framed motivational posters. Community first. Cohesion through order. The irony was almost funny. Through the half-open door, I heard her voice first, Karen. "We need to move quickly on the Curtis property," she was saying. "She's asking questions at the county assessor's office. If Eleanor doesn't sell, the whole timeline slips. We need that corner lot cleared by August." "I'm aware," said a male voice, colder. "That's why the special assessment kicks in next week. By the time she sees the bill, she'll be desperate." I didn't knock. I just walked in. Karen jumped like she'd seen a ghost. The man behind the desk didn't flinch. Middle-aged, confident, expensive haircut. Richard Vaughn, HOA president, and, from what I could tell, the mastermind behind all this. "Jamie," Karen said, recovering quickly. "What a surprise. We were just discussing your grandmother's situation." "I figured," I said, setting my folder on the desk. "You forgot to mention your situation, though." I opened the folder, laying out the tire spikes one by one in Ziploc bags. "I found these in her driveway. The police are reviewing local security footage. I figured you'd want to know before they call you." Richard's eyes didn't move from mine. His smile never wavered. "That sounds serious," he said. "But you understand, that's a police matter, not an HOA one." "And yet," I said, flipping to the first violation, "these notices started the day after your group began pressuring her to sell." Karen stepped forward. "Our enforcement is entirely fair and impartial. We're just upholding community standards." "Really? Then you won't mind explaining why these violations cite sections that don't exist." Their faces changed. "No mention of paint color guidelines," I continued. "No clause about mailbox height changes after purchase. And Section 12.4 specifically protects historic homes like hers from being retroactively punished." Karen's lips pressed into a line. Richard kept that smile on, but now it was strained. "The board recently voted to amend the exceptions." "Without notifying homeowners? That's illegal in this state." Karen opened her mouth to object, but I cut her off. "I've already sent a certified request for all violations issued in the past 6 months, and a copy to the State Housing Authority. They're interested in patterns." That was a bluff. But judging from the color draining from Karen's cheeks, a good one. Richard didn't blink. "Submit your request in writing. We'll respond within 30 days. "I already did," I said, sliding a receipt across the desk. Then I pulled out one last document, a development proposal for a luxury home on a plot of land marked with Grandma's address. Submitted 3 months ago, signed by Pinnacle Development Group, the same firm Richard used to work for, the same company owned by Karen's husband. "That," I said softly, "is your timeline, isn't it?" The room went dead quiet. Karen's jaw worked silently. Richard's fingers tapped once, twice on the desk. "Speculative," he said finally. "Just a placeholder in case a sale happens." "Then why the harassment?" I asked. "Why the sabotage?" Karen crossed her arms. "These are dangerous accusations." I stared at her. "So is putting spikes in a senior woman's driveway." Richard stood. "This meeting is over. If you have concerns, bring them to the next board meeting." "Oh, I will," I said. "But first, why don't you explain why my grandmother just got hit with a $300 special assessment?" Karen blinked. "All corner properties were assessed last month for infrastructure improvements. And Eleanor was the only one who received a notice." Richard gave a thin smile. "That's her concern, not yours." I stared at him for a beat longer. "Then I'll make it mine." As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Is this Eleanor Curtis's granddaughter?" a woman's voice asked quietly. "Yes." "Don't go back to the cottage," she whispered. "They're watching it. Meet me at the cafe on Maple in 20 minutes. You need to know the truth." Then the line went dead. I turned back toward the office just in time to see Karen watching me through the window. Phone pressed to her ear, mouth moving, eyes cold. And that's when I realized I wasn't just protecting my grandmother's home anymore. I was protecting the evidence she'd spent years collecting, and maybe something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The cafe on Maple looked exactly like the kind of place that had served the same meatloaf special for 40 years. Its windows steamed slightly from the lunch crowd, but I spotted her in the back. Silver hair, navy cardigan, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She was stirring her tea with an oddly steady hand. "You're Jamie," she said as I slid into the booth. "Eleanor's girl." "Granddaughter," I corrected. "You're Sophia?" She nodded. "And you're in more danger than you know." I blinked. "Why are they targeting my grandmother? What do they want with her property so badly?" Sophia leaned in. "It's not just her land. It's her case file." "What case file?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slid a flash drive across the table. "Your grandmother's been investigating Pinnacle Development Group for over 2 years. Richard Vaughn, Karen Thompson, her husband Robert, they've been working together, buying up properties, rewriting HOA bylaws to force people out, then flipping the land for triple the value." I stared at the flash drive. "Wait, she's what? A whistleblower?" "No," Sophia said, her eyes sharpening. "She's a prosecutor, senior division, real estate fraud task force. Her cover was being a retired teacher, but she moved here on purpose to expose the scam." My stomach dropped. "You're saying Grandma's not just being harassed, she's building a legal case?" "She was building it until someone realized who she really was. That's when the violations started. That's when she slipped and broke her hip." I leaned back in the booth, stunned. "You think the fall wasn't an accident?" Sophia shrugged. "Let's just say the timing was convenient." Before I could respond, her eyes flicked over my shoulder. "They followed you." I twisted to see a black SUV parked across the street, the same one from the night before, the same vanity plate, PNCL 1. "They don't know I'm involved," Sophia whispered. "But you? You're visible now. They think if they scare you off, Eleanor will fold." "They've got another thing coming," I said quietly. Sophia reached into her bag and handed me an old paper folder. Inside are copies of property transfers, developer communications, even altered HOA bylaws. Your grandmother's originals were hidden in a locked cabinet in her study, but she gave me backups, just in case. I hesitated. "Why give them to me now?" Sophia gave a sad smile. "Because Eleanor's files were compromised 2 nights ago. Someone broke into her house while she was in rehab, ransacked her desk, took the main binder. But," I stopped, remembering, "there's a locked filing cabinet in the back bedroom. Not anymore, Sophia said. Cleaned out. But if you're lucky, Eleanor might have left something else behind. I took the folder and flash drive and tucked them into my coat. She trusted you for a reason, Sophia said. Now we have to trust you to help finish this. When I got back to the cottage, I didn't go in through the front. I circled around the back, checking for cameras. I crept through the screen door, heart pounding, and locked it behind me. Nothing looked disturbed. Yet. I went straight to the bookshelf in Grandma's study, remembering an old habit of hers, hollowing out old cookbooks for hiding spots. My hand froze on the spine of Southern pies and cobblers. Inside, a USB and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch, a charm shaped like a gavel. Her keychain, the one she never let anyone touch. When I slid the USB into her laptop, it didn't boot into files, it booted into a case dashboard. Photos, audio recordings, tax documents, drone footage, maps, and a recording, video, of Karen and Richard standing in front of a massive model map of Pinterest Village talking about accelerating acquisitions and neutralizing resistance. Grandma had labeled it, Meeting with Developers, May 14th. Karen confirms bribery of zoning official. This wasn't just fraud. It was conspiracy, collusion, and Grandma had everything. As I sat there stunned, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Leave now, they're coming back. The file they took wasn't the real one, and they know it now. Then, boom, the front window shattered. Glass sprayed into the living room. I ran to the hall as Karen's voice rang out from the porch. Jamie, I know you're inside. I grabbed the USB, the gavel key, and the velvet pouch and darted through the back again, slipping into the shadows between the pine trees. They were inside before I hit the street, but I had the one thing they hadn't counted on, proof. And if they wanted to play dirty, they hadn't seen my grandmother in court. By the time I reached Sophia's house again, my lungs burned from the cold night air. She let me in without a word, locking the door behind me and sliding all 4 deadbolts. I figured you'd be back, she said softly, handing me a towel. You look like hell. I brought the files. I held out the pouch and USB. Tyler, the retired IT guy, looked up from his laptop. Let's back that up, twice. I handed him everything, my hands still trembling. They broke in again, shattered the front window, called my name. Sophia set down a mug of tea next to me. That was a message. They want you to know they're watching. But we have them now, I said. This USB, this is everything. Names, payouts, Karen bribing a zoning officer, it's all there. We know, said Judge Marcus, appearing from the next room. And that's why tomorrow's HOA meeting is going to be the last one they ever run. Tomorrow? Sophia nodded. Emergency meeting, 7 p.m. They moved it up. They're planning to foreclose on 6 non-compliant properties, your grandmother's included. They think we'll be too afraid to fight back, added Tyler. That no one will show. They think we're tired. Judge Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. But what they don't know is your grandmother is on her way back with backup from the Attorney General's office. She called me personally. They're coordinating a sting. I blinked. Wait, she's out of the rehab center? She checked herself out early, Sophia said, smiling faintly. She told the nurses, justice doesn't wait for a hip to heal. The room filled with a low, nervous energy. We have until 7 p.m. tomorrow to finish preparing, Debbie, the local paper editor, said as she taped together a massive map of Pinterest Village. These red houses already sold, the blue ones? On tonight's foreclosure list. I looked at the map, my stomach turned. Grandma's cottage, Sophia's house, Mr. Washington's, even the sweet retired couple on Garden Lane, all of them. They're not just flippin' houses, I whispered. They're flippin' lives. Tyler turned his laptop toward us. And they've done it before. 3 other communities, all tied to Pinnacle, all involved forged violations, sudden fee hikes, and fake meetings with no minutes. Debbie tossed a copy of the HOA newsletter onto the table. They just published a new one, claims Grandma's property has mold and electrical faults. Total fiction. They're laying groundwork to justify condemnation next. They're pushing fast, said Marcus, because they know the longer this drags, the more likely someone exposes them. Then let's expose them, I said. Everyone paused. I continued. We've got evidence. Recordings, photos, documents. What we need now is public pressure. We make the meeting impossible to ignore. Pack the room. Tell the press. Put a camera on every lie. Tyler grinned. Finally, someone under 30 who gets it. Sophia laughed, pouring more tea. Your grandmother would be proud. Just then, the burner phone on the table buzzed. It was Grandma. Sophia answered, putting it on speaker. I'm 10 minutes out, she said, her voice strong and clear. Tell Jamie to meet me at Judge Marcus's house. I grabbed my coat. I have something else, Grandma added. Jamie, check your coat pocket, the inside one. I reached in and pulled out a small silver hearing aid. I wore that thing every day, she said. And I recorded everything. Every meeting, every violation, every backhanded threat. It's all on that device. I stared at it like it was a holy relic. You have their words, she said. Now you just need the witnesses. I smiled. We'll bring both. When I arrived at Judge Marcus's home, Grandma was already inside, her cane resting against the wall, her coat hanging on the chair. She looked older, but sharper than I'd ever seen her. Come here, she said, holding her arms open. I hugged her tightly. They made one big mistake, she whispered. They came for the wrong old lady. Then she turned to the group. Let's make them regret it. We spent the next morning preparing. Tyler compiled the hearing aid recordings. Debbie prepared printed evidence binders for each board member. Sophia gathered volunteers to knock on doors and personally invite every neighbor to the meeting. No one was to sit this one out. By 6:45 p.m., the community center's parking lot was full. By 6:59, there was standing room only. At exactly 7 o'clock, Richard walked in, looking confident. Karen followed, hair perfect, clipboard in hand. And then they saw Eleanor Curtis, standing, cane tucked under one arm, and seated next to her, 2 men in suits from the Attorney General's office. Richard's smile faltered. Karen's hand began to tremble. Grandma stood. Let's begin, shall we? The tension in the Pinarest Village Community Center was thick enough to slice with a butter knife. Folding chairs squeaked as neighbors shifted in their seats. Some clutched manila envelopes marked violation. Others whispered behind hands. But most just stared. At her. At Grandma. Eleanor Curtis stood beneath the flickering ceiling lights like she belonged there. Her once muted cane now rested untouched against the podium. In one hand she held the silver hearing aid. In the other a folder marked Exhibits AF. Richard Vaughn tried to hold control. Let's bring this emergency meeting to order, he stammered, tapping the gavel too hard. It echoed like a gunshot. Karen sat beside him, her smile stretched tight as piano wire. We're here, she said, her voice sugary and smooth, to vote on foreclosure proceedings for 6 delinquent properties. Objection! Grandma's voice cut through like a blade. You could hear the HVAC fan pause in confusion. Eleanor, you're not recognized, Richard began. I recognize myself, she said. And so does the state of California. She held up her ID. Senior Deputy Prosecutor, White Collar Crimes Unit. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through dry grass. Richard paled. Karen stopped breathing. I came to Pinarest as Eleanor Curtis, retiree, she said slowly. But I stayed because I saw what was happening. Seniors forced out. Violations fabricated. Properties sold under market rate. And always, always, to the same development group. Her eyes scanned the room. I've spent 2 years gathering evidence. Tonight, you'll hear it. From your board, in their words. And with a click, Tyler dimmed the lights. A projector flickered to life. The first video played, Karen and Richard on a hidden camera in the HOA office, laughing over a stack of violation forms. "Write her up again," Karen said in the footage. "If she can't pay the fine, she'll fold." "Which one?" Richard asked. Karen smirked. "Does it matter?" the audience murmured. Debbie from the Gazette passed out printed transcripts. Grandma nodded to Tyler. Next video. Karen and Robert Thompson standing in the Thompson backyard with blueprints. "She's the last house on the corner," Robert said. "If we don't get that lot, the whole Waterview model collapses." "Then make her want to leave," Karen replied. "Cut the roses, smash the mailbox, bury her in fines." The room erupted. Mrs. Patel, who'd kept silent for years, stood up, voice shaking. "They did that to me. Said my son's wheelchair ramp violated porch integrity standards. They fined me $700. Gregory, the retired lawyer, rose from his seat. "I was threatened with a lien over non-native grass. I've lived here 25 years. More voices joined, more confessions. Decades of whispered suffering now spoken aloud. Richard slammed the gavel. "This is irrelevant. None of this is formally on the agenda." "Then add it," Grandma said calmly, "because I've filed a motion for injunction to freeze all HOA actions pending criminal investigation." The two men in suits stood up. "We represent the California Attorney General's office," one announced. "As of this moment, the state is seizing all records of the Pinehurst HOA under suspicion of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse." Karen's clipboard slid from her lap and hit the floor. Tyler stepped forward, plugging in one final file. "The most important recording," he said, "taken from a conversation outside the community center 3 weeks ago." The screen showed Richard meeting with Robert Thompson. Robert's voice was unmistakable. "Once her house is down, we move forward with the Pinnacle expansion. We'll make a killing." "What about the legal side?" Richard asked. "You've got cover," Robert answered. "Just make the vote happen and let the fines do the rest." Gasps, cries. One man stood up and yelled, "You were never protecting our community. You were selling it." Richard looked around. Karen buried her face in her hands, but Grandma wasn't finished. She held up the hearing aid. "This contains over 100 hours of recordings," she said, "including every meeting where the board bypassed member votes, every whispered plan to forge documents, every time you claimed to act in our best interest while plotting to gut this place from the inside out." Richard bolted. He actually ran toward the back door, but waiting for him there were 2 uniformed officers. "Richard Vaughn, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and elder intimidation," one said, snapping on the cuffs. Karen stood shakily. I was just following orders." "Then you can explain that," said the other officer, to a judge. They were led away. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was relief. After a long moment, Grandma turned to the crowd. "There will be no vote tonight," she said, "but there will be accountability." A neighbor stood and clapped. Then another. Then the room thundered with applause. When it faded, she looked at me. "Jamie," she said, "let's go home." And this time, we walked through the door without fear, because it didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to us. The headlines hit the morning papers like a thunderclap. HOA fraud exposed. Prosecutor poses as retiree, brings down board. By sunrise, the Pinehurst Village Community Center was swarmed with reporters, camera crews, and residents holding folded newspapers in one hand and homemade casseroles in the other. But back at Grandma's sky-blue cottage, a different kind of noise was rising. The rhythmic pounding of hammers, the buzz of circular saws, the shouts of neighbors who had never spoken to one another before, suddenly working shoulder to shoulder like they'd done it forever. Tyler had already installed temporary security cameras on every corner. Sophia was handing out muffins and paperwork, replacement bylaws, written with real fairness this time. And Debbie, still wearing her press badge, was organizing interviews with elderly residents who'd stayed silent too long. "Your story matters," she told each one gently. "It's not just news, it's protection." I stood in the garden, kneeling beside Grandma as she replanted her roses, roots cracked but not destroyed. "This soil still remembers her hands," she said softly, pressing dirt around a new stem. "Just like I remember what it means to belong." The cottage, for all it had endured, still stood. The mailbox had been welded back to its original post. The broken windows were being replaced, and the west-facing wall, falsely accused of fading, had been lovingly repainted by Marcus and his granddaughter. That morning, something else unexpected happened. Karen's teenage son, Nathan, arrived at our front steps, hat in hand. I know what my mom did," he said, eyes low. "She's not talking to reporters, but I wanted to apologize for her, for all of it." Grandma blinked, taken aback. He continued, "I was the one who cut the roses. She made me do it. Said if I wanted my car insurance paid, I had to help the neighborhood look better, but I knew it was wrong." Silence. Then Grandma stepped forward, her hand trembling just slightly as she reached out and placed it on his shoulder. "You're not your mother," she said, "but you are responsible for who you become." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Can I come help fix the fence?" She smiled. "You just did." That day, the community did more than mend boards or repaint trim. They rewrote the very rules of what it meant to live here. Under Grandma's guidance and Judge Marcus's oversight, a new HOA charter was drafted. Simpler, fairer, transparent. "No more backroom decisions," Grandma told the assembled crowd at the gazebo that weekend. "No more weaponized rules, and no more lifetime board seats." The first vote, a motion to rotate board positions every year, with no exceptions. It passed unanimously. Sophia was elected president. Debbie became the new ethics officer. Tyler agreed to handle digital transparency and set up a public archive of every decision made. And Grandma? Well, she refused any title. "I'm not here to rule," she said. "I'm just here to remind us who we really are." But not all wounds healed easily. That afternoon, a moving truck arrived at the now empty Thompson house. Karen and Robert had sold it quietly, under legal pressure and public shame. Their belongings were loaded without ceremony, the blinds drawn tight. As the truck pulled away, I spotted Grandma watching from the porch, not gloating, not bitter, just quietly reflective. "They built a palace," she said, but forgot it was sitting on top of stolen bricks. I nodded. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" She shrugged. "Sometimes people don't change until everything else is gone." "But sometimes," she added, glancing at the kids playing tag in the open field, "all it takes is one person standing up." Behind us, the sign for the new community garden was being installed. Curtis Commons, a place for roots. The plot had once been designated for demolition. Now it was lined with raised beds, each marked with hand-painted signs. Tomatoes from the Washingtons, rosemary from Mrs. Patel, sunflowers from a little boy named Jonah whose family had almost been foreclosed. Tyler wheeled out a donated picnic table. Debbie was organizing the first potluck, and across the yard, Marcus was laughing, as Sophia scolded him for using the wrong kind of mulch. As dusk settled and fireflies flickered like tiny street lamps, Grandma leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, her voice soft but sure, "we never needed Pinnacle's help to make this place worth living in. We just needed to stop being afraid." We watched as lights came on in every home, not flickering with fear, but glowing with something we hadn't felt in years. Hope. And as neighbors carried casseroles and folding chairs toward the gazebo for the first real town hall in decades, I realized something else. Justice wasn't just what we got in court. It was what we were building here, together. One voice, one vote, one backyard at a time. They say when justice is served, the villains disappear. But that's not always true. Sometimes they just lie low and wait, and it was nearly 2 months after the new bylaws passed when I spotted the black car idling 2 streets down. I recognized it instantly. Robert Thompson's Audi. He hadn't been seen since Karen's indictment. Word around the neighborhood was they had split quietly, under pressure from Pinnacle's attorneys and the district investigation. But now he was back, watching, waiting. I told Grandma right away. She didn't flinch. People like Robert, she said calmly, don't disappear until they've wrung out every last ounce of control. He's here because he lost it. Still, that night I triple-checked the locks, and I wasn't the only one. Sophia's porch light stayed on until dawn. Tyler moved his surveillance feeds to a backup drive. Debbie had a just-in-case article already drafted, titled, "The Developers Who Wouldn't Quit." But then something unexpected happened. Robert knocked on our door. He didn't look smug or polished this time. His suit was wrinkled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He held a small, heavy folder in both hands. "May I speak to Eleanor?" he asked me, his voice low. Grandma stepped out onto the porch slowly, her cane clicking once on the wood. She didn't invite him in, just waited. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. I came to return something." He opened the folder and pulled out a weathered manila envelope. Inside were signed contracts, notarized deeds, and a letter from Pinnacle Development dated months ago, before the scandal broke. It was a proposal to buy out the remaining properties along the creek, including Sophia's, Mr. Washington's, and yes, Grandma's, for well below market value. "They told me we'd be giving people a chance to retire," Robert said. "Said it was urban renewal, that no one wanted these old houses anymore." He hesitated, then added, "I was wrong." "You knew what they were doing," Grandma replied, voice firm. "You watched them target the elderly, watched them fake rules, push people out of their homes." He looked down at his shoes. "I was raised by a man who told me winning meant never saying no to money. I believed him." "You don't get a medal for realizing late what others saw all along," she said. "But you do get a choice, walk away, or help fix what you helped break." He didn't speak, just left the folder on our porch and walked back to his car. Later that night, Grandma and I sat in the living room going through the documents. Tyler came over, scanning everything for hidden clauses or digital trails. "This letter," he said, holding up a creased page, "this is the original timeline for Pine Arrest Village Phase 2. Look here. Projected completion, April. That's next month." "So they're still planning something," I said. Grandma's jaw tightened. "Then it's not over." The next day, an emergency town meeting was called. Not to panic, but to prepare. Under soft lighting at the community center, neighbors sat in folding chairs once more, this time as equals, not subjects. "We beat the HOA," Marcus told them. "But we didn't beat the machine that created it." Then Grandma stood. "I've been asked if I plan to retire now," she said, her voice steady. "But how do you walk away when the same storm is brewing in someone else's town?" She reached into her bag and held up a map of 3 other neighborhoods, highlighted in red, all showing signs of the same coordinated fraud. "This wasn't just about us. This was a pattern, and I won't rest until we stop it at its source." The room burst into applause. But that night, as we returned home, we found a yellow envelope taped to the door. Inside was a single page. No threats, no names. Just an old photo of Grandma in her state office days, circled in red, and a note. "We remember who you are. You should remember what we know." We reported it immediately. The sheriff launched a fresh investigation. But what rattled me most wasn't the threat. It was the fear that forgiveness had made us forget the fight. That next morning, Sophia arrived with coffee and a quiet fire in her eyes. "We're not backing down, Eleanor," she said. "Not now, not ever." And for the first time since Robert's return, Grandma let herself exhale. "Then we'd better make sure the next chapter's louder than the last." The story could have ended with Richard in handcuffs, with Karen humiliated, with Robert's shameful folder dropped at our door. But when corruption digs in its heels, truth has to reach further. The yellow envelope on our door wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder. That the fight Grandma started wasn't confined to one quiet street lined with roses and rocking chairs. It was bigger than blue cottages and rigged violations. It was a blueprint being repeated across the state. Within a week, the Attorney General's office contacted Grandma again, not for more testimony. This time, they wanted her help leading a task force, one designed to investigate HOA abuses tied to predatory developers. Retired or not, her name now stood for something no law firm could ignore. The Blue Cottage became more than a home. It became headquarters. On Sunday mornings, neighbors used to share casseroles. Now they shared case files. Judge Marcus met with state auditors in the living room. Debbie wrote front-page exposés right from Grandma's kitchen table. Tyler installed a local database tracking suspicious HOA patterns across multiple towns. And Sophia, in the most unexpected twist of all, ran for State Housing Board and won. But it was never about titles. It was about roots, about memory, about not letting fear take hold where family once grew. And it wasn't without sacrifice. After the story aired on national news, Grandma received hate mail. We had a brick thrown through the window one night. "You cost powerful people a lot of money," one letter read. "Keep digging and you'll be buried under it." But the community stood taller than the threat. Neighbors volunteered to patrol nightly. Karen's own son, yes, the one who used to laugh at Grandma's gnomes, offered to repaint the fence himself, no payment needed. People who once kept their curtains closed now held signs that read, "Homes, not hustles." One afternoon, while Grandma reviewed testimony by the fireplace, I noticed her reach up and touch the gold gavel charm around her neck, the same one that once opened her hidden filing cabinet. "I never wore this while I was working cases," she said. "Too sentimental, too obvious. But now," she smiled, "now they know who I am, and I want them to." A month later, Grandma stood before a packed state house. Live cameras, judges, journalists. But she didn't start with laws or loopholes. She started with a blue mailbox. One rule changed. No one voted. And a woman who spent 40 years serving justice suddenly had violations for her roses. She held up one of the fake violation notices. Laminated now, preserved not as anger, but as evidence of silence too long accepted. The crowd didn't cheer. They rose, in quiet, respectful solidarity, because they knew this wasn't just a tale of one corrupt HOA, this was their story too. When Grandma returned home that night, something had changed. Not in her. She was still the same Eleanor Curtis, who made the world's best molasses cookies and hated late bloomers in her rosebed. But in the air, in the quiet, there was peace and purpose. Neighbors gathered under the flowering dogwood outside the cottage. Mr. Washington strummed a guitar. Sophia read the new HOA charter aloud from a handwritten parchment. Debbie presented a framed headline from the state paper. "Senior Prosecutor Saves Dozens from Predatory HOA Takeovers." And me? I looked around and saw more than a neighborhood. I saw a family. Grandma turned to me and placed the golden gavel charm in my hand. "You're good at this," she said. "You listened. You fought smart. You didn't flinch." I had a good teacher. Maybe, but now it's your turn to teach. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just closed my fingers around that charm and felt the weight of something that wasn't metal. It was legacy. Because sometimes the real key to change isn't in the courtroom or the news. Sometimes it's in a small blue house with peeling paint, a porch swing, and a woman who once baked cookies and now rewrites laws. In the end, this was never just a story about a blue cottage. It was never just about mailbox colors, cut roses, or even a spike strip meant to scare someone off their land. This was a story about power pretending to be community, and a woman who saw through the mask. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. She didn't break windows or make threats. She gathered proof. She listened. She outlasted them. Because when you build your life on truth, no bulldozer, no violation notice, no greedy developer can tear it down. For years, people looked the other way, afraid to speak up, worried about rocking the boat. But then they saw someone who stood firm, even while recovering from surgery, even while under threat. And in her strength, they found their own. That's the lesson. That real community doesn't come from rules on a clipboard. It comes from people willing to protect one another, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So if you're reading this, watching this, or living in a neighborhood where something feels off, don't wait until they put spikes in your driveway. Ask questions, support your neighbors, know your rights. Because home isn't just where you live, it's what you stand for. And sometimes the smallest porch in the neighborhood becomes the loudest voice in the state.